This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Facebook says it aims to raise $5 billion through its first public sale of stock. That would be one of the biggest initial public offerings ever. And it would be much bigger than Google's first public stock sale in 2004. That IPO raised almost $2 billion. The world's biggest social media network filed documents with the Securities and Exchange Commission on February 1st. The documents are required before the company can launch an initial public offering. A date for the sale was not immediately announced. Facebook has more than 800 million users around the world. It represents the second most visited website after Google. Now, experts say the social media company is in a position to become one of the world's most valuable internet companies. Stock expert Anupam Pollitt at Greencrest Capital says that among social media sites, Facebook is in a class by itself. It's the biggest company in this space, and we believe what makes it very unique from every other company that went public last year in this space is that it is very, very profitable. Early estimates value the social network between $75 and $100 billion. That includes earlier investments by other companies. David Kirkpatrick wrote the book, The Facebook Effect. He says Facebook's IPO will be historic. Will Facebook's IPO be the biggest IPO in American history? Probably not, but it will certainly be by far the biggest internet or technology IPO we've ever seen. The stock sale could also make 27-year-old Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg one of the world's youngest billionaires. Investment companies are likely to be the first to buy the stock. Investment manager Jim O'Shaughnessy points out that the price of some IPO stocks fall not long after they first go on sale. Stock in LinkedIn, Groupon, and Zynga dropped as much as 25% after going public. Many IPOs come out being very, very overvalued because they get so hyped up, and investors are so taken in by the story that they're willing to pay any amount just to be able to get into the stock. That generally translates to being very overvalued. So we generally tell investors that they should wait probably a good full year before they look at buying stock that was recently IPO'd. There were similar questions 8 years ago about Google. Today, Google is one of the world's most valuable technology companies. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Frasuti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Facebook is the world's biggest social network and the subject of the movie The Social Network. The real Mark Zuckerberg and his friends at Harvard University launched the site in 2004. Facebook says it reached 500 million users last July. Now, the American bank Goldman Sachs and the Russian company Digital Sky Technologies have friended Facebook. They are investing a total of $500 million in the company. The deal values Facebook at $50 billion, more than many publicly traded internet companies. Goldman Sachs is expected to raise $1.5 billion more by selling shares of ownership in Facebook to rich investors. The plan does not include a public stock offering, at least not right now. For now, Facebook would remain a private company, meaning a company that does not sell shares to the public. The plan has brought new attention to the largely secretive world of private financing and the rules for private companies in the United States. The idea is that investors in public companies have protections that investors in private companies do not. The Securities and Exchange Commission says a private company must report financial information if it has more than 500 shareholders. A new business, a startup company, is usually considered too risky for average investors. But a promising startup may find a small number of private investors, often known as angels. These investors are willing to lose everything for a chance at big returns. Ricky Tata has been involved in raising money for startups. He is now chairman of his own investment company, Covestor, with offices in New York and London. Mr. Tata compares the difference between public and private companies to the difference between marriage and dating. When people are dating, he says, there are understandings, but few rules. In marriage, the rules are more clear and well-defined. In his opinion, the only real benefit for a private company is lower administrative and record-keeping costs. Yet, he tells us Covestor remains a private company after a few years because it is still too risky for most investors. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can comment on our programs and find transcripts and MP3s at voaspecialenglish.com. We're on Facebook and Twitter at This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Facebook is the world's biggest social network. It has over 900 million users worldwide, and it reported $3.7 billion in sales for last year. The company has been privately held since 2004. That was when Mark Zuckerberg and several classmates at Harvard University started Facebook as a business. But on May 18th, Facebook becomes a publicly traded company. That means its shares will be listed on the NASDAQ stock market and sold to the public. Interest in the stock kept building after Facebook announced details of its initial public offering, or IPO, earlier this year. The IPO will make billionaires of the company's founders, including Mr. Zuckerberg. Eduardo Saverin, a Brazilian-born co-founder, has been strongly criticized for recently giving up his United States citizenship. By doing so, he will avoid a 15% tax on the value of his shares. He now lives in Singapore. Shortly before the trading started, Facebook told the Securities and Exchange Commission that it wanted to increase the number of shares being offered to over 420 million. The company had earlier said it planned to offer 337 million. The starting price was set at $38, also an increase. Some financial experts say Facebook could raise $16 billion, making it one of the biggest IPOs ever. Most of Facebook's revenue comes from online advertising. But the company also says it expects to earn money from fees charged on the sales of virtual goods. These are digital products used in social games, not physical goods. Facebook says it sees important income coming from this new market, which could reach $14 billion by 2016. Not everyone is pleased. General Motors ended its advertising agreement with Facebook just before the stock began trading. The car maker said it did not see results from the millions of dollars it spent on advertising with Facebook. And Facebook has been criticized for some recent business decisions. It offered $1 billion to buy Instagram, an application for sharing photographs. The deal requires government approval and has yet to be finalized. So, is Facebook worth the price of the stock? That will be for investors to decide. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can read, listen, and learn English with more business stories at voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. The Federal Reserve calls America's economic recovery disappointingly slow. So the Federal Reserve decided to add $600 billion to the financial system by the middle of next year. To do this, the central bank will buy Treasury securities from dealers. The action is known as quantitative easing. The goal is to reduce long-term interest rates. The hope is to create conditions where businesses will invest more and people will spend more. Buying longer-term Treasury securities will make less government debt available to investors. This will raise the price. As bond prices rise, their rates fall. Long-term securities affect rates on home mortgages and other loans. Lower rates on corporate bonds could lead businesses to invest in more equipment and jobs. Lowering short-term interest rates is the Federal Reserve's main way to get banks to increase lending. But those rates are already near zero. The Fed earlier bought $1,750 billion of treasuries and other securities. That program ended in March. Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke wrote in the Washington Post, "Easier financial conditions will promote economic growth." But interest rates are already low, and critics say further cuts are unlikely to create much growth. Inflation also is low, so low that some economists worry more about the risk of falling prices and wages. But others say pumping more money into the economy will weaken the value of the dollar. They say it could raise inflation to dangerous levels, and not just in America. Interest rates in the United States and Europe are lower than in Asia and Latin America. As a result, Asian and Latin American economies are already struggling with an overflow of investments. Large flows of capital can raise currency values and make export-based economies less competitive. Several nations are considering limits on capital. The Fed's action in November had been expected, but it came as the heads of 20 leading economies prepared for talks in South Korea. And it came a day after the Republican Party retook control of the House of Representatives from the Democrats. President Obama invited leaders of both parties to meet on November 18th. One immediate issue was what to do with tax cuts that are set to end in December. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. On July 21st, President Obama signed into law the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. He said, "These reforms represent the strongest consumer financial protections in history." Together, the changes represent the biggest rewrite of financial rules since the Great Depression. At the heart of the 2,300 pages in the bill are promises to protect average Americans. Congress agreed to create a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but the Federal Reserve will pay for it. The central bank will budget about $500 million a year. Travis Plunkett is legislative director of the Consumer Federation of America, a consumer rights group. He says this new independent office will have a lot of responsibility, and that is a good thing. The Bureau will set rules for the marketplace and enforce existing laws. One goal is to keep home buyers from getting bigger loans than they can pay for. But the Bureau will not have power over auto lenders or banks with assets of less than $10 billion. Financial interests spent millions of dollars fighting the bill. The House of Representatives passed its version in December. In July, the Senate voted final approval with the aid of 3 Republican senators. House Minority Leader John Boehner called the financial reform bill ill-conceived. He said, "I think it's going to make credit harder for the American people to get, clearly harder for businesses to get." But President Obama says Wall Street took irresponsible risks that threatened the financial system. Under the new law, banks no longer can own or invest in certain trading operations. The government has new powers to seize failing financial companies. These include businesses that, during the financial crisis, were considered too big to fail. And President Obama says the law does something else. He said, "Finally, because of this law, the American people will never again be asked to foot the bill for Wall Street's mistakes. There will be no more tax-funded bailouts." Regulatory agencies will write hundreds of new rules for banks and other financial companies. This follows years of deregulation. Opponents in Congress say they will try to block some measures in the new law. But even if those efforts fail, it is too soon to know just how strong the new rules will be. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Big stock exchanges in the United States are linked in what is known as the National Market System Plan. The idea is to process deals and report the best available prices to the public as quickly as possible. But there are other ways of investing that operate outside the national market system. In the late 1990s, the Securities and Exchange Commission wanted to make room for new ideas in financial trading. The Commission developed new rules for exchanges and for what are known as alternative trading systems. Alternative trading systems are operated by brokers or dealers. They mainly serve big investors like retirement funds, universities, and financial companies. These systems trade the same public stocks as other market players do, but they do not publicly report their trades. This secrecy explains why they also have another name, dark pools. As of October, there were 86 alternative trading systems registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. A buy or sell order for a large amount of stock can move markets. It can influence other investors to try to buy or sell shares of that same stock. Supporters of alternative trading systems say the secrecy reduces the risk of a disorderly market. But the International Monetary Fund has concerns about alternative trading systems. It says they limit the ability of the investing public to price a security effectively. Also, the IMF says the activity of these trading systems is largely outside the reach of market regulators. Another alternative to the investing methods that most people know is the work of so-called angel investors. These are individuals who invest in new projects, and not just internet startups that hope to become the next Google or Facebook. They could also be small local businesses. Steve Moore made a lot of money in the software business. After he retired, he made an interest-free loan to Christy and Keith Kissler. The couple operate a small organic farm in Washington state. They could not get a bank loan to build their business. In return, Mr. Moore received a minority share of their business. The Center for Venture Research at the University of New Hampshire says angel investing fell more than 6% nationwide in the first half of last year. Still, angel investments during that period totaled $8.5 billion. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. American children and teenagers have increased their use of entertainment media by more than 1 hour a day in the last 5 years. On an average day, they now spend 7.5 hours using media. These are the findings of a new survey. It included devices like TVs, computers, mobile phones, and MP3 players, but also media like books and magazines. It did not count media use for school. Vicki Rideout at the Kaiser Family Foundation, a health research group, wrote the report. She was surprised that kids could fit even more media time into their day. She found that they spent 10 hours and 45 minutes if you counted each device individually. But children multitask a lot. And Vicki Rideout says this is not necessarily a good thing. She says, people who study the brain will tell you that you can't actually multitask in that way. You're really switching back and forth sequentially from different tasks, just doing it rapidly. And you don't really do either task as well as you would do them if you did them one at a time. The study suggests a link between heavy media use and lower performance in school. About 1/4 of those who used media the least reported that their grades were mostly average or below. But that was true of half the heavy media users. So where are the parents? Children who had any rule limiting the use of any kind of media were exposed to an average of about 3 hours less media a day. But only 1/3 of children had to follow any rules. Girls spent more time than boys on social networking sites, listening to music and reading. Boys spent more time on video games, an average of 48 minutes more a day than girls. Some other findings. Time spent reading books has not dropped in the last 5 years, but time with newspapers and magazines has, though some reading now takes place online. Blacks and Hispanics use media over 4 hours more a day than other groups. And for all children, media use appears to reach its highest point between the ages of 11 and 14. Vicki Rideout will try to explain these findings in future research. The report is based on more than 2,000 students ages 8 to 18. They took a written survey in class through May of last year. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Carolyn Persutti with the VOA Special English Economics Report. State and local governments across the United States are facing big budget deficits. Many of these shortfalls include promises of future retirement payments for public employees. Several states have had to borrow money for pension plans that have fallen below required funding levels. Pay and benefits for public workers have been a target as state and local governments try to cut spending. At the same time, there are efforts in several states to reduce the negotiating rights of public employees. In many cases, public employee unions have agreed to accept lower pay, but they oppose efforts to limit collective bargaining. An effort by Republicans to do that in Wisconsin led protesters to occupy the state capitol building. Almost every state requires a balanced budget, yet worries that state and local governments might not be able to repay their debts are now adding to the costs of borrowing. Illinois had to offer a high return of nearly 6% on bonds to be repaid by 2019. Experts say on average, public employees are paid less but have better benefits than workers with similar skills in private jobs. However, They say these differences in labor costs are a lot less than some people think. Still, traditional pension plans pay a set amount for as long as a retiree lives. States like Georgia, Michigan, Colorado, and Ohio are considering a change for future employees. They might offer retirement plans similar to what are called 401k plans. These are a common form of plan offered by private employers. Employers and workers both put money into the plan. Workers can invest the money in stocks or bonds. Their retirement savings are defined by the return on their investments in the plan. Federal workers already have a savings plan similar to a 401k. John McGlennon heads the government department at the College of William and Mary in Virginia. He says the economic crisis of 2008 continues to affect state and local tax collections. Also, many pension funds have less money because their investments have yet to fully recover from the recession. But Professor McGlennon says things could change. He says states might not be in good financial condition in the next few years, but they usually recover more quickly than we think they will. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The United States is considering the future of an American law called the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA. This law allows countries in sub-Saharan Africa to export some goods and natural resources to the United States without duties. AGOA is set to end in 2015. It was signed into law in 2000 and has been extended once already. Earlier this month, American Trade Representative Michael Froman met with African ministers in Ethiopia for talks on the possible renewal of AGOA. He said the United States is interested in African trade talks with the European Union. He said American officials want to know about the results of those talks before they decide what to do about extending the law. Mr. Froman said African partner countries need to think about how they want to work with the United States on renewing it. He said the countries need to understand how the issue relates to their negotiations with the European Union. EU economic partnership agreements with African countries would be different from AGOA. Not only would African products be duty-free in Europe, European goods sent to African markets would not be subject to import taxes either. Mr. Froman said the wording of AGOA might need to be changed so the law is more like the EU partnership agreements. He said the United States is unlikely to support calls for giving African partners one-way access to the American market while limiting trade for American companies. In the end, the United States Congress will decide whether or not to approve an extension of the law and for how long. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In June, leaders and top finance officials from the world's 20 biggest economies gathered in Toronto, Canada. One of the big issues they discussed is how and when to reduce deficits and economic growth measures as conditions improve. Chancellor Angela Merkel defended Germany's decision to cut spending by $100 billion over 4 years. But some experts say the world economy is still too weak for Europe's biggest country to reduce spending. Earlier this year, Germany was slow to react to the Greek debt crisis. European countries later had to agree to a nearly $1 trillion rescue for the euro area. Other countries, including Britain, France, and Japan, have also announced cuts. But American Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says, "Without growth now, deficits will rise further and undermine future growth." Economists also point out that spending cuts alone do not solve the problems of countries with structural economic problems. G20 nations are also struggling with financial reform issues. These include new rules for risky financial products and closer supervision of banks. In June, Britain's finance minister announced a new tax on big banks. Germany and France are considering similar measures to pay for future financial problems. President Obama proposed the idea for the United States in January. But how many countries will join Britain is not clear. 19 countries and the European Union form the Group of 20, including developing economies like Brazil, China, India, and Russia. Economist Sebastian Mallaby at the Council on Foreign Relations says G20 nations should work together on financial reforms. G20 nations also face the issue of trade imbalances, like the one between the United States and China. China said it would not discuss the dispute over its currency at the Toronto summit. But China announced it will slowly let the value of the yuan rise. It later reached its highest exchange rate in 2 years. China's export prices may rise, but an American diplomat said the action takes an irritant off the table in the U.S.-China relationship. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. For more news about economics, visit our website at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also comment on our programs and find transcripts, MP3s, and podcasts. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. 11 countries first began to use the euro in 1999. Today, 17 of the 27 members of the European Union are in the euro area. The euro's foreign exchange value has remained strong against the dollar and other currencies. But economic growth in the euro area was only 0.2% from April to June. Europe's biggest economy, Germany, grew at half that rate. Ireland, Portugal, and Greece have all required rescues. Greece received emergency loans twice. Debt and other problems in southern Europe remain a big concern. In early August, the European Central Bank bought more than $30 billion in Italian and Spanish debt securities. Italy and Spain have yet to recover from the worldwide recession. The purchases of their government debt helped reduce their borrowing costs, but the bank will probably have to act again. On August 16th, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy met in Paris. They discussed economic governance for the euro area and cooperation on budget and tax policies. Chancellor Merkel said, "We want France and Germany to move closer in terms of fiscal integration." Their proposal calls for a true European economic government. It would include the leaders of the 17 euro countries and would be led by the European Union president. The group would meet at least twice a year. One goal would be to control budget deficits for euro area countries. Rules limit the deficits of EU members to 3% of the size of their economies. But many members, including France, have bigger deficits than that. The two leaders also proposed a tax on financial dealings in Europe, but they did not support the idea of euro bonds. These would be loans guaranteed by all euro countries instead of only the governments seeking them. The European Commission says it supports the French and German proposals. The Commission proposes and enforces legislation for the EU. An EU spokesman said, "We already mentioned the need to strengthen the economic part of the Economic and Monetary Union. What is happening now, since the beginning of the crisis, and what has been announced as a proposal by France and Germany go exactly in this direction." But many experts question whether European countries will be willing to surrender individual powers and deal with their debt problems together. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. India is traditionally a tea-drinking country, but Indians are gaining a new taste for coffee. This has led international coffee companies to consider moving into the market. At the same time, local business people are looking for new ways to profit from the country's tea-drinking tradition. They are opening new places that offer tea. Coffee shops have spread from major cities like New Delhi and Mumbai to smaller towns. In the past 10 years, cafes have become increasingly popular. India's huge population of young people has quickly taken to the coffee culture. Indians now drink twice as much coffee as they did 10 years ago. The success of the coffee market has gained the attention of foreign companies like Starbucks. The American-based company will open its first store in India later this year. Other companies like Lavazza and Costa Coffee are already there. The head of the India Coffee Trust, Anil Kumar Bhandari, praises Starbucks' decision. He says cafes in India have become central to the lifestyle of the young middle class. He says coffee companies, like Starbucks, should have been here before. Almost any cafe chain which has a reasonable quality with its service, ambiance, and food, and coffee first, will succeed in this country. Look at the young population, he says. They are all taking to it like ducks to water. India has over 1 billion people. Business experts point out that half of them are under the age of 25. Yet, even with the growth in coffee drinking, Indians still drink 8 times more tea. They have been drinking tea for more than 150 years. India is also one of the world's biggest producers of tea, or chai, as people call it locally. Indians usually drink tea at home or in offices, or buy it mostly from street sellers. But some business people hope to change that. Amulik Singh Bidral is 36 years old and a graduate of Harvard University in the United States. He opened a place called Chai Point in Bangalore, the center of India's information technology industry. In less than a year, 13 more Chai Point locations have opened in the city. One tea drinker in Bangalore welcomes the new outlets. Out-of-home options like this are new, especially since coffee drinking has boomed in the last couple of years. This is a little different. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, welcome to Economics in Special English. The International Labor Organization says nearly 200 million people are without jobs around the world. And the ILO is warning of even higher unemployment this year. The United Nations agency released a report called Global Employment Trends 2013. It says the number of unemployed worldwide rose by more than 4 million last year from the year before. The report says 1/4 of this increase was in developed economies. The remaining 75% was in mainly developing economies in Asia and in African countries south of the Sahara Desert. The report also says an estimated 39 million people stopped looking for work last year. The average length of unemployment increased sharply in developed economies. 1/3 of all job seekers in wealthy countries were unemployed for a year or more. The ILO's Director General, Guy Ryder, says the world's economic recovery is not expected to be strong enough to reduce unemployment quickly. His group says the labor market is especially hard for young people. The ILO says 12.6% of people between the ages of 15 and 24 are unemployed worldwide. It says more and more young people who experience long-term unemployment stop looking for work. This prevents them from gaining needed on-the-job experience. Guy Ryder says to create jobs, all countries must provide more predictable policies. He says these include measures to raise wages and support buying. He says countries should enact reforms to strengthen their banking industries so banks can provide credit. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. America's biggest car maker accepted $50 billion in federal aid from the Obama and Bush administrations. People joked that GM meant government motors. Now General Motors could be on the road to recovery. The company recorded over $2.5 billion in profit in the first half of the year. The government still owns 61% of GM as a result of the bailout. Canada is also a shareholder. But now GM plans to sell stock to the public again. GM spent just 40 days in bankruptcy. It sought protection from its creditors in June of last year. GM restructured. It discontinued some vehicles and closed dealerships and factories. In April, GM repaid almost $7 billion in government loans. Many of its creditors are waiting to see how much they get. GM plans an IPO, an initial public offering of stock, later this year. The company could raise as much as $15 billion. Chief Executive Edward Whittaker left the company September 1st. He wants the government to sell all of its shares in the company during the IPO. Many experts believe the Treasury will act slowly over time after the public offering is completed. If the stock price rises, the government could profit from the rescue. But the IPO is risky for the company. The offering will test the willingness of investors to take an equity share in the new GM. Buying equity is not like buying bonds. Bonds represent a loan. Equity represents ownership. Investors willing to buy equity shares in a company expect one thing: growth. GM believes it can make that happen, in part with a new electric and gas hybrid car. The Chevrolet Volt can go up to 64 kilometers before it uses any gas at all. The Volt is expected to start arriving in showrooms later this year. GM is also looking overseas. The world's fastest-growing car markets are in developing nations. GM is now selling more cars in China than in the United States. GM still leads the American market, although Toyota is now the biggest car company in the world. There are signs that America's big three car makers may have put the worst of their recent troubles behind them. Chrysler also went through bankruptcy and says its sales are up. Italy's Fiat holds a 20% share. Ford Motor Company avoided bankruptcy and refused government help. Ford reported close to $5 billion in profit for the first 6 months of the year. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The best example of something is often called the gold standard. It sets the standard against which other things are measured. In economics, the term describes how major trading nations once used gold to set currency values and exchange rates. Many nations continued to use the gold standard until the last century. In the United States, people could exchange paper money for gold from the 1870s until 1933. President Richard Nixon finally disconnected the dollar from the value of gold in 1971. Some politicians from time to time call for a return to the gold standard. But in 1978, the International Monetary Fund ended an official gold price. The IMF also ended the required use of gold in transactions with its member countries. Since that time, gold prices have grown, but unevenly. Prices, uncorrected for inflation, have hit record highs recently, above $1,400 an ounce. But people keep buying. Nyang Chan Nguyen is a gold shop owner in the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh, and says, "Some of my customers have even bought more as they believe the price will probably go higher. I sell more gold at these higher prices." Some people are gold bugs. These are investors who say people should buy gold to protect against inflation. People have valued gold for thousands of years. The soft, dense metal polishes to a bright yellow shine and resists most chemical reactions. It makes a good material for money, political power, and, more recently, electrical power. If you own a device like a mobile phone or a computer, you might own a little gold in the wiring. The gold standard was the subject of one of the best-known speeches in American political history. It took place at the 1896 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. William Jennings Bryan wanted the country to use both gold and silver as money. The idea was to devalue the dollar and make it easier for farmers to pay their debts. Bryan said, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." This speech made William Jennings Bryan famous. He was a presidential candidate 3 times, but he never won. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn more about the world every day and learn English at the same time at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.